of 735,800 is also slightly up. But that would be for small scale capital. Are we going to see some of those details as we go through the individual departments then? Or we could ask about them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Oliver. Yes, that is correct.
All
You
right.
can ask for them once we get into the other budgets.
Thank you.
Anything else? Let's then go through the departments of Community Services. Administration is on 4-86, 485. Gives you some detail. Any questions on administration? A decrease in levy requirement of 15% over last year. I hear no questions. Feel free to go back if I'm rushing you. Administrative and Client Services, General Operations, page 489, detail 2 pages prior. Councillor Height, questions?
My question's on 487, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
There's performance measures in there, and there's this P-card transaction business, and they're increasing substantially, where AP invoices processed are going down. I would assume that AP invoices, wouldn't that be your purchase orders? And P-cards is something like staff using credit cards. So is that how it works, Nikki?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Height. That is absolutely correct. It is strictly for small dollar purchases that are being done by P-cards that staff have.
$1.3 million is a lot of small purchases, and the problem with that is you don't have tracking. Purchase orders track everything, and there's approval levels. P-cards are way harder, and it's alarming that it's doubled in just a few years. In 2015, it was $630,000. Now it's $1.3 million. There should be a better way if you're getting that high with your small day-to-day transactions.
Mr. Cribbs, please.
I'll give you some opening comments and then turn over to Mr. Johnson. But both the previous council and this council have approved a general approach to our purchasing policy, and our corporate approach is to do everything as much as we humanly can on corporate credit cards, ultimately to reduce the overall cost of purchasing items by this corporation. We exercise extreme controls over the use of it. I can tell you, I started here 9 months and change ago, and my own card failed miserably the very first time because there's so many controls exercised on it. I was in a restaurant that no alcohol in the bill, but because it had the word bar in the name, the card wouldn't work. I use that as a, and I was there with the multiple other GMs, including the one in charge of purchasing at the time, so it was sort of a happy fail. But the point being that overall, as a system, it has reduced our costs of processing invoices, the volume of those we've done, and more importantly, it's brought modern day electronic controls beyond just human eyes to our overall purchase of goods and services. And frankly, out in that sort of operational world, every time you're out and about, whether it's a gas station, fuel for a vehicle, or whatever you happen to be talking about, it's quite efficient. That being said, the specifics can come from Mr. Johnson. So this is a general way we've been going under the instruction and direction of council, to be clear. It's not something we've just dreamed up in the back of our heads. And we've been working at it for years to get it this way. So this has been the goal, to be abundantly clear.
Mr. Johnson, anything to add to this topic?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Norfolk County's P-card program, I would say, is very good. It's one of the best that I've seen, and with other municipalities. It's spearheaded by Shelley Darlington in the ECS program, and Karen Judd as well. She looks after the P-card program. And the great thing about the P-card program is there's several things. First of all, with the P-card purchases, we actually get a small credit on those purchases versus paying by invoice. So that goes towards your levy, which is a definite advantage. It's also more efficient as far as payment. There was a study done where, and I don't know the numbers exactly, but the message is the same. In order to process an invoice, going through the signatures and the processes and things like that, and the labor involved to enter it into the system and so on and so forth, costs around $80 to $85 to process one invoice, whereas that same purchase using a P card is around $19, $20. So there's definite efficiencies using P cards for these types of purchases rather than major ones where you would need a PO. So with those items, it makes it a lot more efficient to use P cards for those types of purchases. Plus, when you have a U.S. purchase, online, it's so much easier, because if we didn't have that, then we would have to actually go to the bank and get a physical U.S. draft and mail it to them.
Further, Councillor Height?
Yeah, what's the limit on the P card transactions?
Mr. Johnson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Height, it depends on who you are. That's one of the great things about the program is sorry, another thing I forgot to mention, Councillor Height, you mentioned signing authority and so on and so forth. There's a monthly reconciliation done on every single P card. And with that reconciliation, it's gone through by staff, and then the manager with spending authority has to sign off on it in order for it to be processed. So that's another factor that we have with the P card program. Now, as far as spending authority and whatnot, it does vary. I mean, the cards to frontline staff are very minimal. The card that the CAO or myself would have it would be a larger amount, but I think it caps out at $10,000 per month, even for the county or the CAO or myself.
Thank you. Good questions. Anything else on page 489? $1,700 reduction, Councillor Sonnenberg?
Back to 88, please.
Yes.
Under objectives, implement new ice allocation and the facility booking policies. I know hockey groups have fought for years over getting prime time, et cetera, and it's always been difficult to satisfy everybody. So I wonder what this new ice allocation means and how is it going to work?
Nikki, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Sonnenberg. The ice allocation policy is actually a policy that is currently in effect and is governed by the Parks and Facilities Manager. We are and have been working on a number of changes to the ice allocation policy to meet the needs of the user groups.
And is hockey on the decline as we've heard, or is it holding its own in time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, hockey it's an up and down. I mean, there is some areas that are going up and there are other areas that are going down. It's a very high cost sport, and with the cost of ice, it just makes it harder for some parents to afford registration fees.
Eight, 9. Ride Norfolk is next, 492. 490 and 91 are some of the descriptives. Councillor Brunton, please.
Luke, on page 492, the transfer from reserves and reserve funds for the Ride Norfolk, is that like the revenue, I guess, is that basically the gas tax? Can somebody answer that? How is that funded? What reserve fund?
James, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brown, you're correct. That is the provincial gas tax portion, not the federal gas tax portion. So we get gas tax from both levels of governments, but it's the provincial one that goes towards the Ride Norfolk program.
So basically, without that, this whole program would be defunct by the looks of it, just looking at it, eh? Safe to say, I mean, there's this year, $134,400 coming out of that reserve fund. How much money's in that reserve fund? The gas that you apply to that particular reserve fund?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brown, we're looking that up right now. I don't feel comfortable answering your first question, whether we would decommission that program if we didn't have that funding or not. I mean, there's other avenues to pay for that program. We could just use the levy, we can use things like that.
You know, I've watched that bus many a times, and there's nobody in it. At least I don't see many people in it. I did see one person in it, but not too long ago, yeah. And, you know, just, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. I just wondered, is the money going into that reserve, whatever it is, and the money coming out every year to provide that program stable, or is it depleting? It is? Okay, but there's enough coming in that's going out, like, I don't know how they fund it, like how do they regulate, is it well, that's my point. I'm wondering if it's what's going in and what's going out, is it depleting or is it?
I'm just waiting for staff, but if they have an answer, but pretty sure there's more coming in than going out.
Yeah.
The gas tax is to be used for public transportation of some sort, and this is the one program that we have, that I know of, and I'm sure there's more coming in than going out. James, are you able to maybe, if not just now, get that answered later? In other words, money coming in from the feds and money, I think it's federal, yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brunton, that reserve currently is sitting at around 40,000. That was the 2016 audited balance at the end of that year. However, with that particular funding, there are some changes with legislation and that we're just not sure of right now. So whether we continue to get the same amount of funding from the province for that program is something that we're looking into.
Well, you just said there's only 40,000 in the fund, and that's the provincial side of it? Do you keep the two separate, the federal and the provincial?
The federal gas tax is a separate reserve, and we don't use that for
Okay,
this program.
but you said the provincial one was 40 grand.
That's the balance at the end of 2016, that's correct.
Okay, well, that's my question really. I assume with 134,000, a large portion of that is from that reserve fund. So is it in a deficit?
The reserve fund's not in a deficit.
Well, I mean, will it be in a deficit? If you only had 40 grand in there and you've taken 134 out, that sounds like a deficit to me.
Correct, but we're expecting, for 2018, we're expecting approximately 80,000 as well. So it's, again, there's legislation that we need to look into in order to look at the funding that's coming up. I'm not sure if you have any more information on that, but okay.
Well, I see it currently, we'll say it's a zero levy impact, but I'm concerned about that whole program, I guess, when it moves forward, if it continues to pay for itself. Is that the way to put it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wells.
Mr. Mayor, as I looked at the statistics on 4-90, and it shows the ridership per day, I had hoped that we would have a greater uptake of the use of that service than we are getting. If I read this correctly, basically in 2016 we had 33 passengers per day, and I see in 2017 we had the same ridership. I think we all support this program, and I think we all would like to see it take off, but it just hasn't seemed to caught much traction yet. That's my only comment, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Height and then Oliver.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I guess for ridership, from what I'm hearing from my constituents, is a timing issue. They don't quite have time to drop their kids off at school and make it to the bus to get into Simcoe. So that's why a lot of the people can take it. Now, for several years now, I'm still receiving phone calls, and it's about getting out of Norfolk County. Because I know Haldeman right now is in talks with Go Transit to have a bus come down into them, and I know years ago, Norfolk County, we used to have a bus. Now, I'm getting calls from people, And what it is that students, when they leave Norfolk County, can't leave in a public transit system. So if your parents don't drive, you don't come home. And I'm still getting those phone calls, and I know I've talked to Ride Norfolk numerous times, and they've been threatening to bring a report where we could expand into Brantford, because I get those calls from people in your towns as well. Simcoe, they want to shop in Brantford or come back, or people from Brantford want to visit their friends in Norfolk, and we're missing that connecting link. Like, the students thing is brutal, because if you don't drive, your parents don't drive, and you don't drive, you're not coming or going. And I'm wondering, are we ever going to see that report, Mr. Cridlin, and are there any funds for that?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Height, you bring up some interesting points. I did sit on the Ride Norfolk Committee with Kevin Lakoch and a few folks from the Health and Social Services way back as a Public Works rep. And I know some of you councillors can probably do better justice than I. There was the token program in Simcoe, the Taxi Lions Club thing. So I think Ride Norfolk got a start on catering to, and it has had a big impact on Marlene Miranda's group. They were spending a fair amount of dollars to transfer people, pay for that. Now we are picking that up. The South Coast shuttle expansion a few years ago has really taken off. Unfortunately, Ride Norfolk for the main run is only one bus. And Brad Smith has been in talks with, I'm reading an email here, yes, with Brantford. There's also a very close to maybe some deal with Tilsonburg, but it's going to take money to expand this. It's only as good as it is for what we have. Now, obviously, if we expand it, there is some funding that we could apply for, but we just haven't got that far because we haven't got the connections with the outside areas, outside municipalities to bring it forward. So yes, we are working on it. I don't know when a report with information could come to this council.
Okay, so further to that, I believe we spend, what, $500,000 on paying cab fees for people to use the methadone clinics in town. Has Health looked at timing that? Like, I believe a lot of them come there early. So you would have to change your bus schedule or something like that for a reduction? It's a lot of money for taxi cabs.
Thank you, Marlene.
So we do pay for a lot of taxi cabs, but our first choice is always looking at the Ride Norfolk schedule to ensure that that's the first choice, because it's the more economical choice to service our clients to get to the respective appointments that they are required to attend.
So you work with the clinics downtown, or no?
We don't work directly with the clinics. We don't necessarily know, other than when we're invoiced by the recipients, when their appointments are, but there is documentation of those rides. We don't make the appointments, so that's up to the patient to make those appointments with the respective clinics, regardless if it's the methadone clinics or any other of the clinics that they attend.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Oliver, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is related to the second bullet on page 4-91, and that is the purchase and installation of AOD compliant fare and communication system for a $20,000 capital outlay. I guess the first and most simple question is this mandatory that we do this? And secondly, what is this system? How is it going to make use of the bus easier for people?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Oliver. The transportation technology upgrade is not mandatory. However, it will help us to become AODA compliant, because right now we are not being compliant completely. It still won't bring us up to 100% compliance, but it will help. The technology upgrade will also help us to automate fares so that we could have a pass card system instead of collecting coin, as well as a better tracking of Ride Norfolk tickets. The features of the system is an electronic fare reader so that we'd be able to have reloadable smart cards, There's a transfer ticket printer, a boarding counter, a GPS service so that we can identify where the bus is at all times to be able to supply better customer service to those that call in wanting to know where the bus is at. There's back office management software, which will help in ridership statistic reporting to make it more accurate. And there's also passenger notification systems that are both audio and visual, which will help with the AODA compliancy.
Anything further? Councillor Columbus.
Yes, Nikki, with this system, $20,000 expenditure, is that, if the bus happens to be upgraded or switched over, is that equipment all movable?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Columbus. Yes, that is correct. That is one of the reasons why we're looking at purchasing this system. It would be owned by Norfolk County, and if our service provider changed, that system would stay with us and be able to be implemented on another bus system.
And that would be working for the South Coast Shuttle service as well?
Correct.
Thank you.
You anything further on Ride Norfolk? Parks and Recreation. The money's on 495. Some of the rationale for the changes are on the previous 2 pages, so I'll give you a second to look at that. Councillor Brunton, please.
I'm going to make a complaint. I've been looking at this, and what's bothering me is we get into every budget, and we're talking about materials and supplies and services, and they're in the millions. They're in the millions. I see no details, or I can really look down into the weeds like we always have to determine, and it's not just this budget. It's going to be in Public Works. I think it's up to, I mean, this budget here that we're dealing with right now is 5.4 million in materials and supplies and services. And I'm not faulting staff if they say that's what they need, but if I could look at it in detail, maybe I could have a difference of opinion. And maybe some people around this table might have a difference of opinion. So it's not, I would like to see more details. And why can't we see it on the screen?
James, are we be able to provide council
Can I just
the
clarify what page you're
breakdown
looking?
of
Well, start
what
with,
supplies and materials are?
I just need to know what page we're on, I'm sorry.
okay, I'm on page Parks and Recreation 4-95.
Okay, so,
And I'm looking at line material and supplies, I guess, if you can bring it up first, and then services. And those two items alone are 3 point something, if I'm correct here, about
3.4 million?
And that's in every budget. And if you went through everything, I don't know what it would cost out of the 200 and something million we spend, but it adds up. Public Works is next, and I think it's probably closer to 20 million.
through
Or there's
Mr.
11 and so on. We'll get to that later, but anyway.
So regarding those two line items, if you look at the services first, yes, that's a $1.7 million line item, but it's made up of, in that particular item, it's probably made up of a fair amount of individual line items. Maybe Nikki can let me know how much there is there, but there's probably a lot of line items on that item. And then if you look at the increase, it's 0.7%. So that's less than CPI, for example, for that particular item. So.
Sorry, repeat that again. It's less than the CPI.
Correct. On the services line, it's the increase there. Without looking at the council-approved initiatives or the new budget initiatives, it's only a 0.7% increase with year-over-year status quo.
Well, I'm not just looking at the increase. I'm looking at the entire budget. Services is 1.7 million. Materials and supplies is almost 1.6 million. Like, that's a substantial amount of money in my eyes.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Brunton, I'll give you an example. In the materials and supplies, the lion's share of that is utilities, hydro, natural gas, and things like that. I'm not sure if council wants to, as a whole, wants to look at those items. We would have to schedule more time in order to go through our budget if we want to go that route. At the opening remarks yesterday morning, Mr. Cribbs mentioned, you know, the amount of money that we're spending per hour at these meetings. And if that's something that council wants to do, then we can present the budget differently going forward. However, we do have qualified staff, professional staff, and we look at these numbers for months to make sure that they're in line. And we do several scrubbing techniques to make sure we're not over budget, and so on and so forth. So,
Well, it's a lot of money, and I would like to see the details, and I don't know why. We've always been able to see it on the screen. We'd scroll up or down. But if the rest of council don't want to do that, then I think we're somewhat neglecting our duty here today. That's my comment. I don't know what the rest of council feel. But it adds up in the entire budget. There's a lot of money there, and I think should be our prerogative to look at it. So.
Any other questions? Councillor Black?
Just on Councillor Brunton's concern, I know in the past what I've done is if I have any concerns about more details, I've met prior to the budget. Like once you get the document and I make my notes, I call staff, and that way I get those answers prior to coming here.
Councillor Height?
Mayor Luke, I have to agree with Councillor Brunton. We're in the information age, and yet we don't get to see very much information, right? Reports are tough to come by. They've been getting better, mind you, and things like that, but honestly, like, I'm so used to working with real tools. To hear that I can't have access to tools is just so bizarre for me. I've worked in offices with 4 people and I have better access to information than what I have here. And I'm expected to make decisions based on that. Like, I don't need to sit here and drill down to everything. The way we do our budget's ridiculous anyway. We should just send it back with a decrease and come back and have it done. But if we're going to drill down to it, I'd like to drill down to it. I can't right now. So, but otherwise, I could sit at home and drill down into it just like every other place I work, except Norfolk County. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions on 4-95? Councillor Columbus.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just got a question with respect to the forestry. I see we no longer have a $27,000 income from Holloman because I guess that contract's been terminated. Where is our income? What is our income from our forestry revenue? Where do you actually find that?
Through the mayor to Councillor, if you see the fees and services charges, the forestry harvest dollars, I'll call them, are included in that $2,086,000 number.
And what would that number be, forestry revenue?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Columbus. The forestry revenue, actual revenue in fees and service charges would be $78,200.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Hearing none, I'm going to move on then to fire. Page 4-98. Increase of 449,000, a 7.7% requested increase. So I'll give you a moment to look at those figures. Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Do we ever charge for false alarms? I know we have that spot in our user fees, but do we ever actually charge for it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Height. Yes, there is a charge for false alarms. The first false alarm is free, and then from then on, we do charge for false alarms. We have charged for a few. There isn't too many, but there is a few that do get charged.
Okay, I'm familiar with the user fees, Nikki. But so what was the revenue from that this year or in last year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Height. If you give me a few minutes, I'll grab that number for you.
Oh, wait.
If you may, I have a question for Chief Dix while we wait for that, and we'll come right back to that. I'm looking at material supplies, there's an increase of roughly 10%, 9.8, $30,000. I know 15 is the fire hydrant identification discs. Are those mandated, or are they, what's the status on those discs?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. It is mandated under the fire code. And in the fire code, it says shall color code the hydrants with the flow, and it recommends that we use the NFPA 291 guideline for the color coding in the flow. And in this particular case, Mr. Mayor, we've actually spread it over 2 years. It's a $30,000 initiative, and we can do it with the assistance of our colleagues in Public Works over 2 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Height. The revenue in 2017 from false alarms was $1,378.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Geisens in Columbus. Microphone, please, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Increased cost of services, $34,400, driven by 30% increase to dispatch. What is the actual total going to be? All we ever see, and I have to agree with some of the other councillors, we don't know what the actual dollar value is for that service. Do we know? Can somebody tell me?
Again, we're giving Nikki a moment here. We'll have that number, Councillor
Okay.
Geisens.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Geisens. The St. Catharines dispatch contract is $154,000 for 2018.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, page 496 talks about Fire Officer 1 and Fire Officer 2. It's regarding training under prior year achievements. I wonder if Chief Dix can explain to us what the difference is between those two categories. The last bullet under prior year achievements.
All right. Through you, Mr. Mayor, through the NFPA, we have now our fire officer designations 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And in our particular case in Norfolk County, we feel that we can get trained up to Fire Officer 2. So Fire Officer 1 are your basic moving from the officer candidate into a captain position, and then the Fire Officer 2 would be moving from the captain into the deputy district chief or the district chief position.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a couple of things highlighted in this section, and to the chief, I guess, or to Nikki. Again, you explained the total value of our dispatch contract of $154,000. A 3% increase to get to that level certainly isn't $34,400. There must be some other substantial increases in the services line to account for that much of an increase, I guess. Can you highlight anything else, Nikki? Because I just did the quick math, and 3% on 150,000 is like $4,500 sort of thing.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Oliver. The budget in 2017 was budgeted at $140,000, and that wasn't the value of the contract for 2017. It had got missed in the 2017 budget when it was being put together.
contract is coming up for renewal after 2018, so you'll be going out to tender again this year, will you?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we extended the contract with St. Catharines from 2017 to 2019. We'll take us
So
in
we've got 2 more
the
years.
2 years.
Okay, thank you. My only other question on page 4-98, Mr. Mayor, is regarding other revenues. Again, we're looking for reasons why we're asking for a 7.7% levy increase, and obviously one of the big ones is that revenue line is down significantly. What revenues would we not be receiving in 2018 that we got in 2017 that would account for such a drop of 143,000 less?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Oliver. The simplest explanation to it is there was debt funding that was included in this budget of $138,000, which was financing the SCBA program. The SCBA program had an offsetting $138,000 in the expenditure line as well. That program is now done. It was a 4-year program. It is now done. So the $138,000 for the debt funding has been removed, but the $138,000 expense has also been removed. So that's really a net levy of 0. Correct.
Mr. Mayor, might I ask the chief just a general question?
You certainly can.
Related, obviously, to the budget. Chief, each year we come in here and each year we see a large budget increase from your department. Do you foresee us ever getting to the point where we won't see such large increases in your department?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, for this year, on our $6.3 million budget, we're up by about $85,000 on our expense side. So through our efforts of staff, they are really taking a look at operations and services, and we're trying to be efficient and as cost effective as we can. So although we were just up $85,000 this year, I'm sure my staff are not going to give them a pat in the back for what they've done to this point, and we will continue to do our best to get within budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Certainly appreciate that. But I looked at 7.7% increase. That's what I looked at. And 7.7% increase is far and over most other departments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sonnenberg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask the chief a general question on response times. Got nothing to do with budget, but I'd like to know. Response times are just over 12 minutes and have been for the last 3 years. Does that meet the provincial standards?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the provincial standard's probably around 14 and a half minutes, so we're actually within our provincial mandate.
So just using Waterford as an example, if there's a fire in downtown Waterford, I'm sure we could respond to it in 5 minutes. But to get to Hartford, I'm guessing it's going to take 25 minutes. So does the provincial mandate work on an average basis? There are people who are not receiving service in the provincial mandated time.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a great observation. That's correct, that we can only be there within our 14 minutes 80% of the time. So there are places or districts within the communities that there's extended travel time.
So as long as you get there in time 80% of the time, that's all the province is requiring.
That's the guideline out there, so
Okay.
it's an average
Okay.
response time.
Thank you.
Councillor Columbus?
Yes, on response time, can you define for us, does that mean when the call comes in and when the first truck gets to the scene? Is that what we're looking at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the clock starts ticking when we are dispatched, so it's when the call comes in. We probably have an average amount of time to get to the station before we can respond, and then the travel time as well to make up that 14 minutes.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, just for my own curiosity, I know under the transfer from reserve to reserve funds, I'm well aware that we had made the decision that the cost of fire hydrant water would be phased over a number of years, so we are contributing. The transfer has been reduced. 219 is the reserve, the revenue part of this budget is what's killing us, not the $85,000 increase at the top, it's the revenue. Are we just going to be another year or two yet on this phase-in transfer or not? I mean, we're well aware of why it's here. It was being charged to the wrong, in the wrong place before. If you don't have that answer right now, that's fine. I'm just wondering how far we got to go on this.
To you, Mr. Mayor. We are expecting that to be finished in 2019.
Next
We will
year.
double check it. If that
That's fine.
information's wrong, we'll let you know.
Okay, no, that's good enough. Maybe another year. Thank you. Any further questions on this? Paramedic Services is ready to go. Sarah's with us this morning, page 4-101. Some of the explanations prior to that, first two pages in front of that. Hello, Sarah, good to see you. We'll see if there's any questions. There's a 6.4% increase on this projection of 4.7 million for paramedic services. I'll start, I guess. The 8.4, again, we're seeing a fairly significant increase in materials and supplies. Sarah, is there anything there that is creating that 8.5% increase specifically? I know there's detail up above.
To you, Mr. Mayor, for council, two things are increasing in there. First of all, the council-approved initiative is the community paramedicine materials and supplies, which is covered 100%. And then the other increase is we had an increase in motor fuel for the vehicles and our medical supplies, just general increases for the year. In addition, the ministry came out with mandated equipment that we had to replace this year as a new equipment in the ambulance, and we therefore have to build that into the budget as consumable replacements over the year.
Sarah, it's my understanding that our materials and supplies are 50/50 funded as well, as the ambulance purchases, capital, everything else?
To you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
Thank you. Keep that in mind, trying to find some cost savings. Everybody happy here? Black and then Oliver, please. Councillor Black.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Sarah, just wondered, do I see somewhere, or maybe I'm missing it, but the equivalent to the fire department on response times? Is there a provincial standard, and how are we performing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, that's a difficult question to answer. There are not mandated standards from the ministry other than sudden cardiac arrest. There are standards that we report to the ministry every year that are approved from the division, and then we report back every year as to how we did in those categories. They are broken up into our CTAS levels, which is the level of acuity of the actual call, and so there's different response times for each of those. So for example, the sudden cardiac arrest standard provincial-wide is that you must arrive within 6 minutes 50% of the time. And then from there, a CTAS 1 would be a high acuity or emergency call. And those are set by the service. So for ours, we do that 8 minutes within 80% of the time. And once we have our full data from 2017, I will be providing an information memo to council detailing our response times for that year.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I acknowledge staff may not be able to answer this one quickly off the top of their heads, but this is a program where I think we've always felt somewhat comfortable that it has been fully cost shared between us and the province, 50/50. Our expenditures have gone up our expenditures have gone up 393,100, of which 50% is about $196,000. I understand that. So if we're going to spend $393 more, we've got to divvy up half of that, 196. And yet the levy increase request is almost 283,000. So there's almost 100 grand of extra levy in there over and above what would be required to 50-50 match this increase. If you can help me on that, and the rest of us, what we don't want to do is get into, creeping into what should be 50-50 becomes 51-49, and before you know it, it's 60-40. Help me on that. Why we're paying more than 50% increase to match the cost increase?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the difficult part of that is a reconciliation. So all of our funding goes back to the Ministry of Health and reporting of all our financials, and then they come back to us with a basic statement of here is what your grant is. You will notice in the top line of revenues that the expected increase in our grant is $30,500. And under other revenues at the bottom, that expected increase is from the community paramedicine program that is actually currently coming from the LHIN. We did receive a base funding for our community paramedicine from the ministry, which has now been part of our base funding for our grant. But there is other revenue coming in from the LHIN to cover that as well. So while there is 100,000, I know that it's hard to justify it right now, but when they get the 2017 report, they then report back to us as to what their 50% funding is. I will pass it to James, but I don't think it is quite 50-50, but it is relatively close to that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Townsend pretty much explained it as well as I could. What they do is they give us the 50, like they do an estimate ahead of time, and I believe when we got the results, we were within $3,000 of what our actuals were. So it was pretty close. It's not an exact 50%, but it's usually close year over year.
I'm able to identify this nearly 100,000 extra levy is because of the timing of the reconciliation, I gather. Okay, thank you.
And your question's very exactly the same. Mine was going to be, why are we only getting provincial, federal increase of 30,500 when in fact we're expecting to contribute 282, exactly the same question, just from a little different angle. And I think it's reconciliation there. Councillor Wells?
Mr. Mayor, if you would allow me again to ask a general question, which is not necessarily related to the budget. However, it deals with the budget item that we had last year with the purchase of the new stretchers. I wonder if since we have the manager here, if she would give us a little report on how these new stretchers are making out.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Council, we have had tremendous feedback from all the paramedics using the stretchers at this time. We do currently have one stationed at every base. The 2 new ambulances that are being replaced this year are also coming with 2 more, so we will have another vehicle, another one in Simcoe for our 8-4 transfer vehicle that works currently, and then another one will be going to Delhi as our spare, so we'll be able to do maintenance without having a crew having to use a manual stretcher. We have had a slight injury with one of the manual stretchers, so we've had 0 injuries since we implemented the actual power stretchers, and they've been well received by both patients and paramedics.
The stretchers go in the house?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council, they have the possibility of going in the house. The problem is because of the electronic device, they are slightly heavier, so we have found that it is easier, unless it's a flat house with minimal steps, to leave them outside and carry the patient out or walk them out if they're in a condition medically to do so.
I guess I misunderstood when we were purchasing these. I thought they were going to help people lift the patient as he or she was coming down the stairs, and because I thought that's where many of our injuries from our staff resulted. So I guess maybe I could listen to that explanation.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council. So there's 2 different implementations. We have the power stretchers and the power loads that were displayed here, and that is for moving the patient to and from their house, in and out of the ambulance, and in and out of the hospital. We also have a stair chair assist, which they would put them on the stair chair. And it is a power assisted so that they can roll them down the stairs without having to lift. So that's another implementation we had about 5 or 6 years ago. And otherwise, there are always going to be situations where paramedics are required to lift a car in the ditch, even lifting a patient off the floor, and we're investigating different lifting techniques and supplies that are out there to ensure that our paramedics have everything they can to minimize the physical strain that they're experiencing.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have, or we have the Port Dover Marina left in the Community Services and the Port Rowan Marina. Lunch is also ready. We have two options, in my opinion. We can break now and do the marinas right after, or we can push through and clean this up. Councillor Wells, what's your wish?
I'd prefer that we finish this department.
So would I, but that's up to council, and we will just move ahead here. Thank you very much. Let's go then. If there's no more on paramedics, I would like to go thank you, Sarah, page 4-104, and we see here a 10% decrease in the Port Dover Harbor Marina proposed budget. I'm on 4-104. Questions to Janet on this. Welcome, Janet. Good to see you. Councillor Black and then Columbus.
I suppose another general question. Just wondered how the new advisory board is working.
Through the mayor to Councillor Black. It was a little longer process getting the members. The letters have went out, and we do have a future meeting, but we have not met yet, but forthcoming very soon.
Thank you. Columbus?
Yes, I realize there's a good budget number at the bottom, 10% less. But my question is about the technical issues with the computer connections. Can that be fixed? It's on page 103. Can that be repaired? Somebody working on it? It's a challenge for you? What is the issue?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have already accomplished that with IT or IS, and that we built a tower last year, and our connection is working now.
Perfect.
We're back up.
Thank you.
Yeah, anything further? Councillor Height?
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just trying to find my notes here. Through you to the treasurer, it says here this is actually a net levy reduction of $273,000. And when I do the calculations on the development fees, are they included in that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Height, when it comes to development charges, they are collected and put to what we call deferred revenue accounts, and then once we have a capital project that's related, that we could use, that has a growth component to it, and we can use different DCs for it, then it's put against the capital project. It's very rare that you see development charges as a funding source in the operating budget.
Okay, so it's stuck in the capital side. I got it. Thank you.
Anything further? I'm going to go to Port Rowan, not that you can't go back to Port Dover while we go to page 4-107. And we see a increase of 35,000 over last year's actual of, or last year's budget of 32 for a proposed budget of 67,200. Questions on this budget? Columbus?
Just to Bill, do you think this marina will ever break even, Bill, with what we've got there to lease out, along with what we're putting towards capital and expenses?
Through the mayor to Councillor Columbus, I think I was asked this question last year, and I think we have come a long ways. If you look under user fees, with the changes we've made, there's another predicted, and it's based on some pretty good numbers, that we should have an additional $8,400 come in as revenue this year. The kicker here is the past, and maybe finance and comment, but fast transfer, we have to transfer the $30,000+ each year to get this marina back into the black. And I hopefully, if I have any luck, in mid-February, there will be a report tabled here with some more ideas on the Dover and Port Rowan marinas coming under one operational division, and with that, some shared synergies. I'm also looking at, basically, you've got a Lions Park on the, if you're familiar with the marina, looking at on your right-hand side coming down the hill is a park. The marina's the other. If we separated some of that, I'm not saying we can, I'm not convinced we can ever make money on this, but I'm sure we can tighten that up quite a bit, and I think my report will ask council for a few recommendations on how we can get there.
Okay, thank you for that. I noticed under challenges, it talks about low water levels, dredging requirements. I've been down there last summer, and I thought the water levels were pretty high, and I didn't think you needed any dredging.
Through the mayor to councillor. Yes, some years low water is an issue. This year it obviously wasn't. However, if we have probably a low or even off the high level, it is a shallow channel which does need to be dredged, I believe, every 7, 8 years, and that is upcoming.
Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question relates to, on the expenditure side, top half of the page on 107, again, infrastructure funding, and I was listening carefully to what you just said, Bill, but the way I interpret that line, it's called infrastructure funding. What we know it really means is transfer to reserve. So we are increasing, obviously, our amount going into the reserve for this marina, roughly 34,000 compared to 2017, correct?
Through the mayor, yes, the 33,900, you did a better job on that than I did. Thank you.
Because we're not spending the money, we're putting it into a reserve to build up our capital reserve so that presumably we can do capital projects in the future, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Oliver, that is correct.
Okay.
There is also a little bit of debt funding in that number as well. So
Okay,
the transfer to reserves is 30,000.
Okay, and quite honestly, Mr. Mayor, if you look at the net levy requirement, essentially all of the increase is attributable to that.
Yes, indeed, you're
And
correct.
so it's not an operational thing, it's going into the reserve, which I think we directed we want to do.
That's correct.
Okay.
Good
thank
point.
you.
Any other questions on this? Okay. Thank you, Janet, for being here. Nikki, thank you. Bill, and others. We will come back, let's say, just after 12:30, 12:35. How about 12:30? 35 minutes? Thank you. We'll go for lunch. Thank you.
On a strip of sandy soil lies a county called Norfolk. It's Ontario, south coast, you know, and it's surely not remote. If you pass through or spend a day or decide to call it home, you'll see why we love it here and are proud to call it our own. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger long. Take in the small town atmosphere, be amazed at all that we grow. Like our kids that go and see the world and can't wait to return home. Drop a line in a placid